Natalia Greene of Ecuador, known to her friends and colleagues as Natty, is a key figure in the movement for recognition of the rights of Mother Nature, or Pachamama, which, as she explains, is an even broader and more inclusive South American concept of the reality in which we all live and breathe. Natty Greene was a central figure in the creation of Ecuador's 2008 Constitution, which specifically recognized the rights of nature. She was also deeply involved in developing Ecuador's remarkable Sne Itt Initiative, which aimed to keep oil underground in the Amazon region. She's the president of Ecuador's national coordinating body for environmental organizations, and until recently she coordinated an innovative program on political plurinationality and the rights of nature at the Fundación Pachamama in Quito. That appointment ended abruptly when Rafael Correa's government sharply changed course and unilaterally shut down both the Sne Itt Initiative and the Pachamama Foundation itself.
I've been working with the rights of nature idea since we were able to include it in the Constitution. How this happened is that I had been working for the Sne Itt Initiative. Before it actually became an initiative, I was working with a professor called Carlos Larrea, and we were working with him to make the assessment on how much money should we ask the world for the Sne Itt Initiative and all of that. This was 2007, and it was that year where the constitutional process started in Montecristi. Alberto Costa was running as he was the president of the assembly, and he asked Carlos Larrea to get involved in especially advising the assembly members about environmental issues. So we will be able to get a very environmentally friendly constitution. During that time, because I had been working with the Yasuni issue, I got involved with Fundación Pachamama. And Fundación Pachamama offered to have a very active role in the constitution in general, especially with some issues like extractivism, like water, and with this idea with rights of nature. Why were we thinking about this idea? Especially because there were some other thinkers that had been coming here, for example, the influence of Ciro Angarita, this Colombian guy who had been speaking about rights of nature before. Bill Twist from Pachamama Alliance had met Thomas Lindsay from the CELDEF, from the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, and he figured out that they were working to recognize rights of nature at the community level, within ordinances and things like that. And we all recognized, with Fundación Pachamama and everything, that it will be very interesting to at least introduce the debate on rights of nature in the Constitution. So what happened is that we decided to include the issue of rights of nature, not with enough hope, not hoping that it will be included as a right, but at least to have a context of a different conversation, to at least have a conversation where we were starting from a point where we understand that we are part of nature. And then, of course, the laws that came in the Constitution will be coherent with that idea. We were dreaming to get rights of nature in the Constitution, but didn't think at that point that we could do it. So we had included many other topics to do these incidents. And I was then hired by Fundación Pachamama with the support of Carlos, and of course with Alberto and all the team that had asked for this advice to get involved with the constitutional process. Before that, I had, as I said, been working with the Sne Initiative. And the reason why I got involved with the Sne Initiative was because I had just finished my master's degree in Flaxo University, and I wrote my master's degree thesis about the indigenous women, the Waorani women, in the Sne National Park. So it was a thesis regarding gender and environment, and the conflict of the Sne National Park before the Sne Initiative started. So I had some context and some knowledge about the Sne National Park, and a relationship already with indigenous people, especially with the indigenous women at the national park. So that's sort of like the story. That's how I got involved with Fundación Pachamama and started this lobbying process with the National Assembly to be able to incorporate rights of nature in the Constitution.
Let's just back up for a minute and talk about the Sne Itt Initiative, because not everybody's going to remember that, but remind us what that was.
Well, the Sne Itt Initiative was born in 2007, and this was an initiative to leave the oil in the ground. How did it come to life was especially because the civil society was in general asking for a new type of development, for something new in Ecuador. And specifically, indigenous people had been asking for an alternative to oil in the Amazon, considering that in Ecuador we had the history of the Chevron case with the Chevron Texaco pollution, the worst pollution in tropical forests, and we didn't want that to be repeated in Ecuador. We have to consider as well that Ecuador had been living during the 90s a decade of a very large period of instability. We had overthrown presidents. We went through a very large bankruptcy in the economy with the banks. We had a lot of problems during the 90s, and people were in many ways fed up with what was going on with politics and economics. When President Correa came to office, one of the things that he got from his participation in the election was that people needed something new. And so he didn't run with any assembly members. He ran by himself with the idea that he will change the constitution. That will be the first thing that he will do. So he actually ruled for a year without any assembly members, with an assembly that was in opposition to him, and then he stopped that assembly, that parliament, to start a constitutional process. And that was a very great initiative, because what we were thinking is that the whole country was expecting to have something completely new. The Sne Itt Initiative comes through all this period of instability, of pollution, of environmental degradation with Chevron, of a new model of development. We were faced with the opportunity to rewrite our constitution, understanding that we were one of the most biodiverse countries in the world, but also understanding that we were running out of that biodiversity. We were destroying that biodiversity very fast. So the Sne Itt Initiative turns out to be an alternative to that oil exploitation. We need to consider, and the audience needs to consider, that the ITT block holds around 20% of the oil reserves of the whole country. However, that's very heavy oil. It's oil of 14 degrees. That's very heavy oil. That's very heavy crude. And it's located in one of the most biodiverse places in the world, the Sne Itt. To take that oil out, it takes a lot of money, it takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of distraction. And so before licensing that block, the government, and in that moment Alberto Costa, who was the Minister of Energy, said, okay, let's take what the social movements are saying, the oil moratorium, the protection of the biodiversity, and let's take this to a different level. That is, let's ask for an international compensation for at least half of what we could have received if we exploited the oil. So we will leave the oil underground, preserve the biodiversity, get an international compensation, use sort of like the principle of shared responsibilities, shared but different responsibilities, and get the international community to get involved in an idea to leave the underground, protect the biodiversity, protect the indigenous people living in the Sne Itt, and be able to protect that oil, protect that territory without necessarily giving up all the economic effort by receiving a compensation. So that's sort of the idea of the initiative that started building up, year by year, getting more like technical advice, being more. It was started to be built in a more structured way, until we ended up having a trust fund to get the funds for the international community, and having everything quite planned to make sure that through those funds we were able to change the energy matrix by investing those funds in renewable oil and renewable energies. So it was a whole plan to start moving away from oil, leaving oil underground, compensating Ecuador for that effort, but also understanding that what we have there is much more important than the oil, because we have biodiversity, because we have indigenous people, because it's maybe the most biodiverse place in the world.
Mm. Yeah, you've got a rich explosion of life there on all fronts. Huh?
Exactly.
Yeah. There's something that didn't get talked about very much, at least I haven't heard talked about very much, was the vision of Ecuador in saying, we're facing things like climate change. These are international problems. We have to start doing things on an international basis, in one country after another, but we have to start thinking as a species, and that to me was another really magnificent aspect of it.
Well, something very interesting in that sense is that as Ecuador, we are no Annex I country, which means that we don't have responsibilities in the Kyoto Protocol. We don't need to reduce our emissions because we responsible for those big emissions like countries like the US or China. So we don't have necessarily objectives in the Kyoto Protocol. However, we understand that we are also affecting climate change, especially not only by the industries and the pollution and the CO2 and the greenhouse gas emissions, but especially through the deforestation. We are pretty much deforesting our forests, and that of course affects climate change. The idea of the Sne Itt Initiative is very important because we are targeting the main problem. The problem with climate change negotiations are that they're all talking about something that is irreal. It's something that you cannot touch, something that you cannot see, which is carbon dioxide. You know, CO2 is something that everybody talks about, but no one knows where it is, what it is. You know, that has been, I think, the way of making governments and people take their idea out and say there are people who are responsible for this without understanding that when they go and pump their car with oil, they are responsible for climate change. They've been taking the idea out of the main problem, which are fossil fuels. That's the main problem. Those are the responsible for creating all that CO2 into the atmosphere. So I think that maybe the most important part about the Sne Itt Initiative is that it targeted the main point. You know, instead of just putting a band-aid over the something, you know, something that is hurt, we were targeting the problem that caused that injury, which is fossil fuels. And it started a debate that instead of reducing emissions, which means that to reduce emissions, you still need to be producing those emissions to be able to reduce, we need to go into the non-emission. We need to understand that there are some, especially some oil fields that should not be taken out. For its biodiversity, for the heavy crude, for the people living on top, for many reasons. But there are some reserves that should not be touched, because if we exploit, and the International Energy Agency gave us, said that we were right last year. They said that if we don't stop taking out at least 50% of the known reserves, we will not be able to attain the 2%, the 2-degree accord from the Copenhagen Accord. So we need to start thinking of leaving the oil underground. And this whole debate started with a small country of Ecuador saying, you know what, we shouldn't talk so much about reducing emissions. We need to talk about the non-emission of oil. We need to leave and move away from fossil fuels. And that was a very, very powerful thing that came out from the Sne Itt Initiative.
It absolutely was. It was electrifying, I think, for the rest of the world. Mm-hmm. And in the middle of all of this, so if I've got this correct, here we have Natalie Greene getting her MA and becoming involved with an advisor who Alberto Acosta says, please come and help us on the constitutional thing. So now, at what, 23, 24, you're
how old was I?
Couldn't have been much more than that, right?
Well, yes.
And so you're deeply involved in this thing that will determine the future of the country. Mm-hmm. And then you get involved with Fundación Pachamama. Tell me about that foundation.
I was actually 25. I'm doing the math.
You were 25?
I was 25, 26, yes.
Tottering old fossil.
Yes. So I got involved with Fundación Pachamama because we were working, Carlos and I were working with the Sne Itt Initiative. And believe it or not, we were doing all the calculations and everything for how much oil should be left, how much oil there is under the ITT, how much money does that represent in carbon, in biodiversity, trying to come up with a number, because it was very hard to come up with a number, or how much the president had already announced in the United Nations that we were going to ask the world at least half of what we could receive. But you have many different variables. You had the variable of the oil price, which is a very different variable. We don't know what's going to be the oil price in a month, a year, not so in 13 years. So that was a very difficult variable to take into account. So we had to consider, how much CO2 was sequestered in the oil that was in the ITT, and many different things. So we were doing that. However, as the work that we were doing at Universidad Andina with Carlos, that was not something paid by the government. Actually, Fundación Pachamama was the organization that started paying for those studies. Why? Because Fundación Pachamama had been working with something called the Greene Plan. There was a plan to leave the underground as a moratorium for all the center-south of the Amazon. Fundación Pachamama had been working with the center-south, with indigenous people living in the center-south of the Amazon that also have really biodiverse territories, but there are no national parks in that territory. And there's very little oil oil that is now meaning to be exploited with the 11th round of oil. However, at that point, there was a threat of oil exploitation, but Fundación Pachamama was trying to come up with an alternative to that threat that was always latent. So the Sne Itt Initiative was something interesting because it was a small idea of this green plan to leave, it was a moratorium for the whole Amazon. So that's why Fundación Pachamama got involved, and since January 2008, we started going many times to the assembly to talk with assembly members, to talk with the advisors, to talk with indigenous people, to talk to different people about what's happening with exploitation of minerals, of oil, with water, with fisheries, but with this crazy idea of the rights of nature. What happened was, and what's very interesting is that when we got there, people like Alberto Costa had already been thinking about it. He had already written an article about rights of nature. And I think we were key in getting involved with some of the assembly members who were not really convinced about rights of nature, and who needed some one-to-one conversation, like, this is an idea that we can do it. And it was important to have the advice of people from the north and people from outside of Ecuador who had already been doing this, not at the national level, not at the constitutional level, but at a subnational level, because it proved that this could be done. It proved that we weren't crazy. Because if you saw the whole spectrum of the people we were working with, especially lawyers, were very against this idea. Lawyers were very, very tough to convince, because for lawyers in legislation 101 at the university, they learned that only people and companies and corporations have rights. The rest are objects for humans. That's like the first thing that they learn. So moving away from that idea that an object such as nature can have rights was completely out of their mind, out of the picture. So it was very hard to convince them. Fortunately, many assembly members were not lawyers, and they did understand. They had advisors as lawyers, but they understood that it was a time for a big change. And Ecuador was looking for this change. If you see that we had a long history of instability, and the Chevron case, and the idea of the Sne Itt Initiative that was breaking a lot of paradigms, we were ready for a big change. It was the right moment, the right people, the right time. And this whole idea started up with a process of asking the assembly members, what's the country you dream of? And that country was a country where life was respected in all its forms, where people were respected in all its forms, and with all this idea that started getting understood that we needed a different model of development away from a socialist model or a capitalist model, a model based on Ecuador. And that model is what we call well-being, buen vivir, or good living, or summa causa in Quechua. And that model is a model where life and people live in harmony with nature, live in harmony with their brothers and sisters, have their basic needs in order, and this model, to have it complete, and we look at it as a pyramid, this new model where we wanted to take Ecuador, not calling it capitalism or socialism, calling it well-being, had two basic columns. One was the understanding that we are a plurinational country, which means that we are a country that recognizes the diversity of people, that there are many nationalities living within a country, and the idea that we are recognizing rights of nature. So if we are able to understand the diversity and respect and give rights to this biodiversity, we could start looking into a different model of relating to humans and to nature. What was very important at that point as well is that, and the reason I think that all of this happened, is that indigenous voice were never really taken into account in any of the other constitutions. As you may know, this is the 20th constitution that we have in the country. However, those other constitutions were constitutions based on a Western society, a Western view of life, of the model, and indigenous voices were not so introduced. When some of the people who were accepted in the assembly about introducing rights of nature asked, why are we doing this? I remember that we had some conversations with some indigenous people, because this didn't necessarily come from indigenous people. The idea of rights of nature didn't come from them. But when we consulted them, they said, well, it's obvious. Nature has rights. For us, it does. why doesn't your law recognize rights of nature? Because our law recognizes that we're a whole, that we're part of nature. And if it doesn't, please go ahead and do so. Recognize rights of nature, because nature has rights for us. So in a way, one of the issues to try to convince some of the assembly members was that by doing this, we were incorporating an indigenous cosmovision, and we were making this constitution a more democratic instrument. It was introducing voices that were not heard before, because it was introducing the idea and the vision of the Pachamama, of Mother Earth. And that, by introducing that idea, we were making this instrument a more democratic instrument. So taking all those things, Chevron, Yasuni, the idea of instability and new change, indigenous voices, and all this will to make bold decisions and bold changes, it was the perfect climate to introduce rights of nature in the Constitution.
It's absolutely a wonderful perfect storm, sort of, isn't it?
Yes.
Now, I've been told that the Indigenous response to the idea of rights of nature is, what on earth are you talking about, right? That the idea that you need to even think about that would strike them as being quite bizarre.
Yes,
right? Yeah?
And that was exactly the reaction that we had. We spoke with Marlon Santi was at that point president of CONAIE, and we had some meetings with them, and that, of course, they said they couldn't believe that our legal system didn't introduce rights of nature, didn't give, not necessarily like that, but didn't give nature the right to exist. Because for them and their cosmovision, it was always incorporated. So what was very interesting was that in our Constitution, we don't only recognize the rights of nature, because nature, as viewed is in Western society, is the trees, water, but it's nature. But Pachamama is much broader than that. Because the Constitution, Article 71, says nature or Pachamama has the right to exist, maintain, because we have those two as synonyms, it broadens the idea of nature to Pachamama, including the cosmos, spirituality, the universe. Even Blanquita Chancoso during this week, she was explaining the word Pachamama as time, as truth, as the cosmos. So you're introducing all of that. You're not only limiting yourself to nature as Western society defines it. You're exploring that notion of Pachamama. So it gives you lots and lots of creative ways of actually implementing rights of nature. What was fascinating to me, and I'm going to tell you this story as well, is that the day before rights of nature were included and recognized in the Constitution, this was April 9th, 2008, because April 10 is the first day where they passed Article 10 that says that people and nature have rights viewed in the Constitution. So the day before, we had a very big group of indigenous shamans coming to the assembly. We had maybe like 10 or 12, there's a video out of this, indigenous people from all the different nationalities, from the highlands, from the Amanos, and from the coast, who came there and did a cleansing to many of the assembly members, and did a ceremony within the building of the assembly, and asked, with all their ancestral medicines, asked that the spirits of nature to come into that place and to inspire the people who are going to take that important decision to make this happen. So, those are the things that are not said all the time, but it was the perfect storm in many ways, even in the ways that we called on the spirits of nature to be there. And it all happened. 93 out of the 113 votes were in favor of recognizing rights of nature in the Constitution.
Fabulous. Yeah, it's just fabulous. Now, when you say Pachamama, I want to come back to that too, because in a sense, it's all it is, right? It's the whole of creation. It's exactly. Pachamama. Mm-hmm. The foundation. Tell me about the foundation with a name like that.
Well, Fundación Pachamama has been working in Ecuador for 16 years. It started working in Ecuador out of also a dream of the indigenous people in this part of the world who were calling to their partners in the north and saying, if you guys want to protect us and protect our territories, you guys need to start changing your dream as well, because your dream of capitalism, your dream of consumption, is so big that even if you guys want to help us with some money or with some infrastructure or with some organizing. There's no way that we can do this by ourselves. We need to do this in partner with the North and partner with the rest to make sure that we start changing this model, that we start changing a model that views nature as an object, but in many ways in a model that is putting so much pressure into our forests, putting so much pressure into getting the oil from underneath our forests, pressure to getting the minerals. So it was a call from the people of the Amazon, from the Achuar, to people in the north to say, let's work together. And that's how Fundación Pachamama, the Pachamama Alliance is born, and then Fundación Pachamama is born here in Ecuador, to be able to work with indigenous people, strengthening their struggles, strengthening their organizations to make sure that they can stand with the idea of protecting the rainforest, protecting the Amazon, and making sure that any project is being consulted, that they are organized as a nationality, that the voices are respected. And that's the work that Fundación Pachamama has been doing during the past 16 years, working in partnership with indigenous people, especially from the Center-South, to preserve their rainforest, to train them on their rights, on their collective rights, and now in their human rights, and now in their rights of nature, to make sure that if they want to resist oil exploitation coming into their territory, they can do that with non-violent tools like law, like the Constitution. Like being trained to understand that they have rights, and that if they've taken the decision as a nationality to protect their forests, there are people in Ecuador and around the world who are supporting them. So that's the work that Fundación Pachamama has been doing, essentially in that area, but doing many other issues like alternatives. We know that we cannot say no to oil without alternatives. So working on tourism has been very important. The Achuar have a whole system of tourism, working with Kapawi Lodge, for example. They have a air company called Aerosensag, where they bring the visitors into their territory. So they have a whole structure of tourism that is a communitarian tourism, and the revenues from that are distributed among the whole nationality. So it's a very interesting model. We're working with health. There's a program called Jungle Mamas that works with maternal health, reproductive rights, and all the issue because there were many mothers who died in labor, so working with health issues. Fundación Pachamama has also been working with alternatives, with complementary currencies, with the idea of complementary currencies as well. Yeah. Yes. Not only in the Amazon, but in other areas, understanding that we don't need money coming from outside, even if we're a dollars economy. We just need to make sure that we are trading among each other for strengthening local trade. So there are many alternatives that are viable into attaining this new paradigm of the Constitution. What was very interesting is that after the Constitution was adopted, Pachamama itself changed its focus to make sure that we were aligned with the Constitution, aligned with the idea of attaining this model of rights of buen vivir, of well-being, strengthening the plurinationality, working with indigenous people, and working with rights of nature. So we were aligned to develop that, and especially, for example, through applying or developing even renewable energies. So we are working, for example, with a project on solar canoes.
Oliver told me a little bit about that, and it's such a good example. Tell me about that.
That's a very interesting example because in the Achuar territory, they use a lot of canoes to move around and boats to move around. But how do they do that? They do that with diesel. So that has two really bad consequences. The first, that you need to take the diesel from the cities into the territory, either by plane or by boat, which is very expensive. And the second is when you burn that, you are producing contamination and you're polluting the waters. And it creates, it's against the system of what they're trying to protect. It's against trying to protect their rivers, their forests. So the project on the energy boats, the solar boats, is very interesting because you're using an alternative energy, the sun, which is renewable. It's there all the time, to be able to move these solar boats and be able to replace the use of diesel through the use of solar panels to provide the energy for the motor to work. So it's, through those specific projects, you are understanding that you can live in a different model. You don't need necessarily, for example, there are some communities that are asking for a road to be built into their territory. Why? Because they need electric light. But if you're able to use, for example, solar energy or biogas with their own residues that are always a problem, with the trash that is also always a problem, and you're able to create energy with that, then there's not so much pressure to open a big road that is going to create deforestation, bring colons or mestizos into the territory and start taking the wood out. So you are helping them achieve their idea of being in the same place, protecting their rainforest, without having more people come into the territory and threaten those forests. So the idea is to work in an integral plan, an holistic plan for the Amazon. What has happened now, and as you might know and some other viewers might know, is that Fundación Pachamama has now been closed.
Let me pause for a second before we come to that and just go back to the boats, because I think that to get a real picture of how that would actually work may be a very useful thing. And as Oliver explained it to me, you would set up solar charging stations along the river at various points. And so all the time, those charging stations are sitting there building up electricity in banks of batteries, and the canoes, and these long, elegant, lovely Amazon canoes, would basically come in and just recharge off those charging stations, and off they go with electric motors. So silent, no pollution.
Exactly, and you're actually even starting a new system of labor for the HR, because this means that you need to hire people for the stations. Someone needs to take care of that. You need to training for that. So it's a whole system of, if you can have those stations within all the rivers, then you won't have the problem of getting out of energy in the middle of nowhere. You can actually communicate through all. So that communication also leads to the acceleration of trade among those communities. Participation, like relationships. Everything. And
it's even something that you could export. I mean, you basically, once you've got that system down and you've got people there that understand it, know how to deal with it, maybe there were people that had no industry 50 years ago, but they could be at the front of a new industry now.
Oh, definitely. And there are, for example, some people in the north called Fundación Cofan, and the Cofanes that are nationality in the north, who are already building the canoes. And they're building canoes out of fiberglass. And they've understood that it's harder and more expensive to bring all the materials, and only by building the canoes, they hire, I think it's almost like 40% of the people of the whole nationality work on building canoes. So imagine what it will be, that you're not only providing a new source of income, but you are avoiding those expenses from the diesel coming up and everything. You're creating more sources of employment, and you're giving them an alternative that can definitely be exported. Because right now, it's very sad, when you go to Cuyabeno, for example, that when you go down the river, you have that very loud motor at the end of the canoe, that you don't see any animals because they're all gone because of the noise. However, if you go there by kayak, and I've done that before, you have all the monkeys throwing things at you. You see an anaconda just swimming in front of you. You can actually be part of nature. You can be part of that beautiful Amazon, because you are having a more harmonious relationship with them, because you're not creating an impact of sound and of contamination. So this is a very interesting alternative for the Amazon. And if you add up all those alternatives, what we were trying to do is trying to develop a new system. And that's the idea, moving away from a paradigm where you absolutely need fossil fuels to exist.
Yeah. Now, if I summarize what we've said so far, what we have is this small, wonderful nation deciding what it wants, to what it dreams of being, and then finding mechanisms to become that. And that's not a short project. That's a huge revolution in the mind, and then a revolution in the way you do business and so on. And that all sounds wonderful. And then in the last couple of years, Fundación Pachamama, which was doing all this work, is no more. What's happened?
That's the sad part of the story.
It is.
Yes, because we were all so excited, and proud to be Ecuadorian. I'm from Ecuador, and I'm so proud to be in the country that is telling the world, you're facing climate change. Well, stop dealing with carbon, start dealing with fossil fuels. You guys try to do something with climate change. Well, the reason why there is this imbalance in nature is because we're treating nature as an object. Let's change that and understand that nature is the subject of rights. You know, we were so proud of like moving into evolving in this sense. We view the vision of rights of nature in a very interesting way, because if you see it from the beginning, rights were only given to individuals. Then, you know, people understood that, of course, women had to have rights. You know, before that, slaves had to have rights. So you stop treating slaves as objects and treat them as subjects, as persons. You give rights to women to vote, for example. So you introduce them in this sort of like right-based system. When you realize that it's not only individuals and women, you know, who need rights, but also collectives, you introduce collective rights, because there are different rights for the individual than for a collective. Why all these evolutions? Because you recognize that a system that has slaves has a limit, you know, a limit where that exploitation can no longer exist. With women, the feminist movement was moving towards a point where women needed rights to be able to have this equality in a way. And right now, with climate change and with all these planetary crises at a multi-level, we are definitely at a point where we need to keep evolving our legal systems to recognize nature as a subject of rights. That was absolutely needed. You know, so it's an evolution. Law evolves while we evolve, and we see this need. So for us, you know, we were so proud, and I am so proud of being Ecuadorian, because we were helping that evolution. We were telling not only Ecuador, but the whole world that it was needed to recognize this change, that we were part of nature, not only in philosophical terms, but in reality, where projects needed to be taken into account, that if they violated rights of nature, they shouldn't happen. And that's what we expected the country to be. We expected to see a country that right after 2008 was going to be a country that recognized the rights of nature, for example, was going to avoid those big activities that were violating rights of nature so much that they were creating an activity or a situation where nature could not regenerate itself. What has happened is that the government headed by Correa is a government that has definitely made a lot of changes in Ecuador, but has also made a big, in a way, a very big demand or a very big commitment with the social part of the country, you know, with the social development of the country. In my perspective, a limited way of looking at the social development, because if you don't develop the social aspect with the natural side, there's no way that you can guarantee those rights of the people without those people having clean water or a clean environment. So if rights of nature don't go with human rights, you cannot really attain social justice. But it's been viewed that to attain that social justice, the government needs money, needs resources. And to do that, they need to take absolutely everything out of the Amazon. They need to take the minerals, they need to take the oil, they need to extract absolutely everything to be able to finance this social plan, to be able to pay the debts with China, who has become an investor for Ecuador. Ecuador, because Correa says they're a socialist government, has moved away from accepting credits from the World Bank or the IMF, and is moving into receiving credits from China. And to pay those credits back, loans that have, you know, an interest rate of like 6 to 7%, to pay that back, they need to pay with whatever we can produce. And unfortunately, we are a country that exports primary sources like oil, like minerals, and these needed to be developed much faster to be able to pay that debt and to keep up with this very large rate of development of road building, of building, you know, like schools and hospitals and you know, just like changing and the whole infrastructure of a state that has become huge. I wouldn't be able to tell you how many ministries we have right now. It's grown so much, the bureaucracy has grown so much, the state as an institution has grown so much that you need to pay salaries. And all of that needs, unfortunately, money. And since Ecuador has not really developed an industry like what the Asian tigers developed, you know, or an industry based on services, what we export are primary goods. And unfortunately, those primary goods come from wherever we have primary resources, and the only place that is, in a way, not untouched, but really in very good environmental conditions is the Amazon, where you have all the oil and all the minerals. So the government has said, we need to take out the oil from, now they've said, from the Yasuni, not only from the rest of the blocks, like the block 31 and the rest of the blocks that are within the park, not only from improved recuperation of oil, like Sacha field and other blocks, but also on the center-south of the Amazon, this area that I was telling you that it was something that no president tried to develop because it was too hard, there was too much resistance, and it was too little oil for the amount of territory. Right now, the price of oil is so high, and the debts are so high, that it doesn't matter. They're going in, they're trying to, and they've called for the 11th round of oil to get contracts for those oil blocks. So it's a moment where, and we've heard the president say, we are going to take absolutely everything that there is to develop, you know? Mm-hmm. And the thing is that we're running out of oil. We are going to, if you look at the maps that we have, the oil reserves are going down. We've reached our peak oil already. Maybe with the ITT, we'll have like an extra 2 years of peak oil, and then all the reserves are pretty much going down. And we are reaching a moment where we're running out of oil, but we're still going to have a big debt. So what there is okay, let's go to becoming from an oil-producing country to a mineral-producing country. So let's go for mining, because there are corporations who've come to Ecuador and said that we have large reserves of copper, for example, large reserves of gold, which always needs to be taken very cautiously, because those companies are saying that we have reserves because they want to get, they want to buy and get their how do you call this? They want to get their benefit if they sell their land to another company. So we need to be very careful about the amount of reserves that Ecuador really has. And the problem right now is that the president has said we're going for everything. We're going for the oil, we're going for the minerals, and for that we need to build hydroelectric plants, huge hydroelectric plants, because we need the energy to be able to take that oil and take those minerals out. And this, unfortunately, is completely against a model based on the rights of nature.
It's extractivism.
It's extractivism, yes. And the plan of WMBB, the development plan of the government, the one launched last year, August in last year, says that we are going to get out of extractivism by deepening extractivism. So it's a formula that I quite don't get. So don't worry about it. I don't get it either. Because they say that with the money that they get out of oil and mining, they're going to develop the country to be able to stop using fossil fuels.
But this is the country that has had the Chevron Texaco fiasco. What good is the money to the people who are living in a huge, I don't know, somebody said 500,000 hectares, mm-hmm. where there is no drinkable water anymore? Yeah. None. I mean, where the authorities are saying they should be trucking water in from the Andes, because mm-hmm. you can't drink the water of the Amazon anywhere. What good is money there?
What we're trying to make the connection is that if you have no drinking water, what good is even a hospital there? The thing is that before getting the money to build the hospital, you have to be able to prevent those diseases, to have more people going into the hospital. So of course you need hospitals, but it's much better to prevent those diseases from coming, and those diseases are definitely going to come if you don't have potable water, if you don't have drinking water, if you polluted the ecosystems. So what we have been trying to say, as social movements in Ecuador in general, is let's think about it, let's pause for a second and understand, why do we not need that much money? What are we making out of that money? Why do we need those huge roads? Those huge roads are not being built for us as citizens. Those huge roads are being built for the hydroelectric plants, for the mining companies, to be able to take that as fast as possible into the ports and export that. So
and not for you,
not for us, not for us as citizens. The indigenous people living in that territory, if you ask them, they don't want, huge schools and cement houses made out of cement and roads. They want their forest. They want their clean water, which the price for that cannot even be compared to a house of cement. It's not valuable. You cannot put a value on nature. So the whole idea of getting all that money, you know, I remember a ministry even got an amount. They said we need like $40 billion to provide well-being for the people of Ecuador. And the idea is that we are not understanding what well-being is. If you understand, and I'm not trying to do it myself either. Go ask the indigenous people. They are saying, and they are also protesting, they're also in the front line of the social movements. They are saying that well-being is this relationship with nature as well. So why do we need all this money? And they say we cannot eat the money. We will not be able to eat a dollar bill, you know? So at one point, and our idea is that before we make the decision and change completely into being a a country based on extractivism, because right now we, of course, 50% of our revenues come from oil development. We are an extractivist country already. But before deepening that, we need to make a decision, like Costa Rica has done. Costa Rica has decided that they're going to go for conservation. They're going to go for tourism. And they have oil, and they've said, we're not exploiting that because we've taken a decision and we're taking the other way. They have minerals, and they have prohibited open pit mining because that is completely contradictory to tourism. A tourist doesn't want to go and see, you know, a big open pit mine. That drives the tourists away. So if you're trying to make a change on the government, on the faith of the country, into sustainable energies, into tourism, into you know, the development of alternatives such as bio-knowledge. You know, the Amazon holds, you know, we've heard, for example, that there are these fungi that biodegrades plastic. There's the frog that is, there are studies being done that can cure cancer. You know, why don't we develop a system of bio-knowledge where we develop that with the people, that they get a profit out of it because they have that knowledge. And we develop real alternatives for the people of Ecuador. Because once those minerals run out, because they are going to run out one day, and once that oil runs out, you're going to be left with a country that has pollution, that has open pit mines, that has acid drainage, that has, you know, polluted waters, and that is not compatible with tourism, with renewable energies, with bio-knowledge. So we need to take a decision. It's not when we beat. No. So we need to take that decision right now, and I think that that's why there's all this like strong pressure from from social movements in general, that we need to respect our constitution to be able to make that change. And what we're saying is that right now, with all those plans, rights of nature are being violated. Rights of nature are being violated when the government has decided to exploit the Block 31. When they've decided to exploit a block ITT, when they have signed a contract to open an open pit mine of copper in the Condor Highlands, that is a very, very biodiverse highland, without consulting the people, and in spite of having an environmental impact study that says that species are going to go extinct because of the contract, hence violating Article 73 that says that any activity that leads to extinction of species needs to be prohibited or limited. So we have so many cases where if you are trying to move into this model and recognize and guarantee the Constitution, that doesn't make sense. You know, it's not compatible.
Now, the use of the word cases brings me to the final thing I want to talk about, which is that you've been one of the organizers of a quite splendid global summit on the rights of nature, which ended with a tribunal in which where a number of people who had offended or were alleged to have offended the laws of the rights of nature were brought to a trial. Mm-hmm. Tell me about that. And well, where does it go from here?
And where does it come? I'm going to tell you where it comes from. Ecuador recognized rights of nature in 2008. 2009 was actually a year that was not so good for rights of nature. The government wasn't taking that, you know, as a slogan yet. They passed the mining law, for example. That is a law that started violating the Constitution, started violating rights of nature, because it gave sort of like an open door to mining companies to come into the territory. So 2009 was a bad year because we were trying to promote rights of nature and the government wasn't. And then comes 2010, where President Evo Morales calls the first People's Conference on Climate Change and the Rights of Mother Earth. And in that summit, 35,000 people create a Universal Declaration for the Rights of Mother Earth. And at that point, the government of Ecuador didn't have an option other than to say, raise their hand and say, we also have that in our constitution. And recognize the power with the people and the power of even the image and the marketing power of letting the world know that we are the first country to recognize rights of nature in our constitution. So the whole strategy changes, and the government starts promoting that we are the country that recognizes rights of nature. In that year, we meet with a very large group of people who met in Cochabamba and realized that we weren't alone. People had been doing that in Ecuador. People were already doing that in Bolivia with a Rights of Mother Earth law, which unfortunately is not a law that recognizes nature as an object, as a subject of rights, but it is a law that gives a lot of it's an environmental law that recognizes Mother Earth, which is important as well. And we recognize there are people in Australia working with rights of nature, people in the US, people in South Africa, people in Europe, and we say, well, this is a global thing, this is a global movement, let's get together. And in September 2010, we organized a conference here in Patate, in Manteles, where we brought all these people that we had met in Cochabamba and said, well, this is something that is global. I remember Bill Twist saying, quoting Victor Hugo and saying, its time has come. And say, well, its time has come. Let's bring along and let's create this global alliance for the rights of nature. And that's where we created the Global Alliance. During the next years, we kept on working, a legislative assistance group started working with other countries like Turkey, like Egypt, like the Maldives, countries that were rewriting their constitution or laws and wanting to incorporate rights of nature. They also worked with Global Exchange and other organizations into the incorporation of rights of nature language and wording into local ordinances. So that legislative work started to develop. But we also recognized the need to connect with other social movements. So we went to Rio +20, we went to Durban, and we worked with other movements to recognize that this is not only an idea that should be mentioned, like nature has rights, but should be applied and guaranteed. And the idea of the Global Alliance was to fit into this global movement that was saying no to climate change, was saying we need a different system, no to consumerism, we need a different pattern. And that rights of nature is sort of like a spinal cord, it's something that is transversal to all movements into the recognition that we need a different system. So we had been planning this conference for a while, for maybe 2 years. We had planned it to be in March last year, but we didn't get enough funding. And finally it happened that we had a little bit more funding to bring people from around the world to Ecuador. So in January 13th, most people arrived to Ecuador. We had a group of 45 people arriving from all over the world, from Australia, from South Africa, from the US, from Canada, from Argentina, Bolivia, Europe, many countries and India, from all over the world. And we met with 15 people in Ecuador. A group of 60 people met in Otavalo from January 14th until January 16th to make sure where we are on the rights of nature, to make sort of an X-ray of the situation around the world, recognize that this was something real, this was something important, we needed to move forward. However, we had some limits. In Ecuador, for example, the non-recognition, the systemic violation of rights of nature, that was also exposed during the days in Pinsaqui, in Otavalo. And we also came up with many strategies. What are we doing? What are we doing next? How do we move this forward? Not only in Ecuador, but in the rest of the world. So we came up with the idea, for example, of having a week of action, not a day of action, a week of action. So having, for example, since October 2nd, that is Gandhi's anniversary of Satyagraha, non-violence, until October 12th, that is the day of colonization, the day of the discovery of the Americas, those whole 10 days as a week of action, saying we need a week to recognize and have actions in favor of rights of nature. So we determined those specific things, like pledges for rights of nature, how do we move forward. But the most concrete idea was something that we had been working before and that finished up and wrapped up the event of the Global Summit for the Rights of Nature. That was that on Friday the 17th of January 2014, we launched the first ethics tribunal for the rights of nature and the rights of Mother Earth. We were able to do this because we had a large number of people from around the world who had the ethic and the moral authority and enough knowledge in rights of nature to be part of an amazing tribunal. We had a tribunal of 10 people. We had a tribunal of 10 representatives of Ecuador and from around the world. So from around the world, we had people from Argentina, from India, from the US, from Canada, and we had people from Ecuador as well, working on rights of nature, working on human rights, indigenous people, women, men. We had a large tribunal that was a very nice mix of a representation of the whole world, listening to 9 cases of violations of rights of nature. So this tribunal heard cases like the BP oil spill. It heard the case of the Chevron case. It heard the case of the Sne Itt exploitation of oil. It heard the case of the mining in the Condor Highland. It heard the case of fracking in the US, the case of the Great Coral Reef threatened by coal mines. It heard the case of GMOs. It heard the case as well of defenders of Mother Earth. And lastly, it heard the case of climate change as a systemic violation of rights of Mother Earth. So we had an amazing tribunal that heard all these 9 cases. It just heard them and admitted them as, in fact, rights of nature violations. We're going to have to meet next to see how this tribunal makes a judgment on these cases and see how we move forward. We had to be able to listen to the people that we are condemning as responsible, the state, the corporations that are responsible. We're going to give them the space to interact and say, what are they doing? Because we need a tribunal on the rights of nature. Why? Because our state, for example, in Ecuador and the world is not putting themselves in the position where they should be, in a position where they are really recognizing rights of nature. And because they're not doing that, we need an ethics tribunal, people with enough authority to make sure that those cases are heard and that the world knows that there's a rights of nature violation. And then if we need to change the system, we're not going to be able to do that if we continue with these systematic cases on violations.
Has tremendous moral authority, and I think it will only gain moral authority as it goes forward.
Well, definitely. This is a seat tribunal, so it's presided by Dr. Vandana Shiva. It has like many other people, Alberto Costa, Enrique Viale, Atosa Soltani, Blanca Chancoso, Julio César Trujillo, Elsie Monge, Tom Goldtooth, Tantu Cardinale. So we have a very, very important group, Corman Cullinan, many people on the tribunal that have that ethic and moral authority to recognize if there has been a rights of nature violation. But we need other people. We want to ask Boaventura de Souza, Leonardo Wolf, other people around the world who are talking the same language and who we can get involved in this idea that we need to move forward with a different model. The idea is to have, for example, the next tribunal meeting in Lima during the COP in Lima in December in 2014 to be able to continue with this trial, with this tribunal, and be able to have more people getting involved, more people with this legal authority to start recognizing that states and corporations are not recognizing rights of nature and are doing all the opposite thing of trying to move towards a society that lives in harmony with nature and that actually does something regarding climate change and reestablishes a relationship with nature.
That's a wonderful place, I think, to come to, having looked at the optimistic beginnings of this whole process in Ecuador, and then the disappointments as the country changed its direction, and now, in a sense, a renewal again in Ecuador, but for the world, right? Thank you.
Well, it's been great. It's a seat tribunal. It's a permanent place, a permanent platform. This is going to keep on going. We have lots of work to be able to keep this going. And yes, it's a great moment for rights of nature. I think that many people were very, very happy with the result, especially because some of them were working, for example, let's say in England. And by coming here and looking that this is happening, they realize that everything that they have been doing as a project or as something small can be big. We have been given the opportunity of dreaming big.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's what the tribunal made. That's what the Global Summit made. And I think that it's been a really push in favor of the rights of nature in the world.
Natalia Greene of Ecuador, activist, organizer, and passionate advocate for the rights of Pachamama. If you're interested in Ecuador, and it's a fascinating country, you may want to watch for our interviews with its former energy minister, Alberto Acosta, and with the brilliant young environmental lawyer, Pablo Fajardo. If you're interested in the rights of nature, take a look at our interviews with David Boyd and John Burrows, and stay tuned. For our Green Rights documentary project, we've interviewed rights of nature advocates from Africa and Australia, from Europe and South America. If those interviews aren't on the site when you see this, they're coming soon. For the Green Rights documentary project and the Green Interview, I'm Silver Donald Cameron.